And so we're entitling this one, Making Room for Ruth. Okay, we're going to make room for Ruth. Well, that's an old program. This is a new one. And we're going to read just a little bit from Ruth, the second chapter, and give you some background. Of course, we all know the story of Ruth in one sense, so we could do a flyover like we did with Daniel last week. But I'm going to read what is, for me, the key part of the story for tonight. We're going to start in the second chapter, the second verse. Okay? And here's the story of Ruth. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind everyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. And it turned out she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." Harvest is always a joyful time. It's a grand time. In the biblical times, it was a celebration because a good harvest meant you were going to have food over the winter time and the harder times, and everybody enjoyed the abundance of the harvest. And they responded back, "The Lord bless you." Boaz asked the foreman of the harvesters, "Whose young woman is that?" The foreman replied, "She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." So she went into the field and has worked steadily from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the fields where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told about all what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain, and she had all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to the men, "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening, and then she thrashed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah, which is about 3/5 of a bushel, it says in my notes. It's a great big bucket full. And her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought and gave her what was left over from what she'd eaten up. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. Now, that's a little different part of the story than we normally use for the story of Ruth. Because the story of Ruth is the story of Naomi and her husband, that during the famine they went into Moab to try and find some food and find better conditions. They were starving to death. And they took their 2 sons. In the process of time, the sons married 2 daughters of Moab. And the father passed away, the 2 sons passed away, and left Naomi a widow. The 2 daughter-in-laws realized it was going to be tough on Mom. So they helped her to get ready to go back to Israel, back to her home. And one got as far as the border, and Naomi told both of them, "You go back home now. You're young ladies who are widowed. It's better that you stay here with your families who can support you." And Ruth made the wonderful statement, "I'm going to make your people my people, and your land my land, and your God my God." And went with Ruth back home. Now, that's the normal story we hear about Ruth, because this wonderful, loving, compassionate daughter-in-law taking care of her mother-in-law. What we don't get a picture of is the painful circumstances that surrounded them. They didn't have a lot of real pleasant options. All right? And it was going to be much harder for Naomi than it would have been for either of the other 2. Let me just give you a quick summary of why this is such a shocking story. This is not a pleasant story. It's not necessarily a happy story. It's just a shocking story. Because, for instance, when Naomi went to Moab with her family, it wasn't supposed to happen. People don't go into a foreign territory in that community, especially when things are bad. They left their home, they left their family, they left the support group around their hometown, and they went into a foreign territory. Do you think foreigners, Moabites, are going to treat you kindly when you are in their community when things are tough? And you're going to be taking food that could very well be used to feed their own families during a drought and a famine? This was a desperate family. Do you know what the word refugee means? Do you see pictures of refugees from Somalia and different places around the world? Naomi and her family didn't just pack up the RV and head across the river. It was a journey of a family of refugees. They were desperate, and this was the only thing they could do to survive. The fact that they died, the men died, is not shocking. In fact, it's shocking that Naomi survived. All right? Because it was a very, very bad time. Now, when we talk about being shocking, in biblical times, the definition of destitute, the picture you have of destitute, is a widow lady. She has no sons. She has no husband. She has no one to take care of her. This is the story of being absolutely without resources. A widow lady in that time could not own anything, could not do business, could not, work to support herself. There was no secretarial jobs or nursing jobs or anything else. It was a very desperate situation. And when Jesus tells the story, even in the New Testament, where the widow puts in the 2 little tiny coins in the offering, worthless junk, less than a penny, He said she's given everything she has. Now, if that's everything she has, that's a desperate lady. Now, you take that widow and you take her out of the context of her own family, her own hometown, any people that she might have had relationships with in the past, and you put her in Moab, it's a wonder she survived. All right? Well, only God's grace. Now, let's turn the story around just a little bit. Now Ruth is walking with her toward hometown. They get to the border. Naomi says, you can't come with me. This is not a good thing. Why would Naomi consider this a very bad thing, to have someone she knows with her to comfort her, to take care of her, to be a traveling companion, to help with just getting back home? You know, she wasn't carrying very much, and she wasn't doing anything but except with a knapsack. I mean, it was going to be hard for her to carry everything else that she needed by herself. Why would she say, don't come with me? Because she knew at home Ruth was going to face just as bad of a situation as what she had had in Moab. She knew her neighborhood. She knew her community. She knew her friends and the family. And Moabites were not welcomed in Israel. If you remember, God had told the Israelite people to destroy everyone, every nation, everybody that didn't believe, that was not Israeli, that was not Israelite, did not have their common roots in Abraham and the offspring of Jacob. She was an outsider in the extreme, and she was a woman without resources. There was no one who was going to protect her. This was a very, very difficult situation. Now, Naomi was going to be having it tough enough, but Naomi couldn't protect Ruth from all the people who would take advantage. Now, if you realize, okay, years and years ago, silly story. I went for a walk while I was in the Navy, actually in my uniform and everything. And I went for a walk in the neighborhood around the Boston shipyards. And we spent the afternoon just walking. And we tried to keep the John Hancock building, kind of as a center of things. We went and kind of around the, and we realized things were getting a little bit run down. There were lots of boarded up buildings. And then we started seeing cars up on cinder blocks, no wheels, all rusted out hulks sitting around different places, abandoned different places. We just kept walking and talking, and my friend Steve and I, we just walked and we talked. We noticed a couple different times that police cars would come up along the side of the street and kind of creep along behind us, but we weren't doing anything wrong. We didn't have guilty feelings or anything. And then someone mentioned to us, kind of in passing, do you realize you're in the heart of Roxbury? The Black Ghetto? 1969?
Oh dear.
The inner cities are burning. Do you realize you stand out like a sore thumb in your Navy uniform walking down the street? What are you guys thinking? You're asking to be a target. And so we found a way to get in the subway and we got out of there. But Larry's over here holding his head. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh.
Get out of there.
That's what Naomi was saying to Ruth. Everybody that wants to take advantage of you is going to give it a shot. And there's nobody going to stand up and protect you. You're easy pickings, and they'll brag about it later, because everybody's going to realize that you put yourself in this situation. They made room for Ruth. And that's why this is a shocking story. That's why I chose that. Boaz took her into his circle. He gave her his blessing. He brought her into the fellowship with the harvesters. He told the harvesters absolutely no one is allowed to touch her. And even more, no one is allowed to embarrass her. Embarrass. Don't call her weird names. Don't run her down. Don't belittle her. Don't humiliate her in front of all these people. It would be the automatic thing to do. And he said, ixnay on the embarrassing A. All right? And when you get that bundle of barley all gathered up in your arms and you're ready to put the loop around to hold it together, take a few stalks out and throw them behind you so it's easier for her to pick them out. When she took that lappful of grain home and leftovers from lunch besides, Naomi was standing there with her mouth open. This is like bread from heaven. Where did you harvest today? You can hear the expression in her voice. I mean, maybe you don't read it with expression, but I read it. What in the world? Who did you steal this from? Because she didn't own the land. She hadn't planted the crop. She had no right to be in there. She was a trespasser. And a foreigner. And a foreign woman. And when Boaz said, go to the water jug and get a drink of water, everybody on the crew went, oh no! You don't realize why? She was unclean. When she took a drink of the water, they would have gone, that's the last drink we're going to have from that bucket today. Until Boaz said, it's okay. It's okay. Getting a drink of water was a major event in this part of the world because she wasn't allowed to drink out of any utensil, any bucket, any container, any stream that the Israelites were going to drink of themselves. If she didn't bring it with her, she wasn't going to get it. Now, why do I do this? Why do I go through this sort of a shocking trauma? Because Boaz did the right thing. He realized, down here later in verse 11, everybody in town, I'm going to paraphrase it, verse 11. Everybody in town realizes what you've done and knows you're of a noble character. A noble character. He did the right thing. He took care of her. All right? Now, what we need to do is kind of put ourselves into that environment. One of the things that they talked about over at the Fellowship Church is you need to make your entire congregation aware that inside the church it's us, and outside the church it's them. And getting past that barrier between us and them is always a big struggle. It's always a traumatic thing to go through for a church. How do you minister to people who think differently than you, who act differently than you, who use language that you wouldn't think of using? I mean, I went through the Navy process. I've heard it all. And my tape recorder in my head, all that stuff stored up there. Okay? I just made a choice years ago not to use any of it. act of worship and obedience for me. To have them in your head. To know how it could be used. And not. Okay? There's nothing in their minds or hearts that even says it's wrong. This is just the way we talk. This is the music we listen to. This is the rap that's on the radio. This is the way we communicate back and forth to each other. We call each other the most ugly names. We have the most embarrassing kinds of things. And then we come into the church and we have to behave. That's not pleasant. It's uncomfortable. And yet, we're told to minister to people that are not just like us. And it's scary. Now, I put it in the context of those foreigners, those Moabites that are out there on the outside of the church. And they look at us with strange, oh man, there's the brethren people again, all getting together for Bible study. What a weird group they are. And we look at them from this side of the windows and we say, how do you ever reach such weird people? And so we are in much the same situation as Naomi was going into Moab and Ruth coming into the hometown of Naomi. And we've got to find a way of bridging the gap back and forth between this barrier that we have. The barrier is called the us versus them barrier. Okay? Who is responsible for breaking down the barrier? Us or them?
Us.
There you go. God did not tell the unsaved people, go and be patient with my Christian brothers because they're weird. No, he didn't say that. He said to his followers, go out there and win those people because they need you. Their life depends on you. And so we have to take on the character of Boaz as he was with Ruth. And that's scary. And it's scary on several different levels. First of all, they're strangers to us most of the time. We don't know them. We don't know where they hang out. We don't know what they do. We don't know a lot of things about them. So that's a big challenge. But then the other part of it is we have to have a desire on the inside because ultimately it's how hungry we are determines how successful we are. You follow? Okay, this is another silly story. I'm going to tell it to you and I'm going to apologize to all my friends. Yeah. Maybe listen to the tape. I went down to a church farther south in Florida than we are and was an interim pastor for several months. And they were a congregation that hadn't grown. They had a beautiful, beautiful building. Most of the congregation couldn't get up the steps to the second floor that they had built in the educational wing, so they basically just closed that section off. They didn't use that anymore, and they didn't use a lot of the Sunday school classroom. But the beautiful fireplace and things in the fellowship hall, they liked that. I didn't mean this to sound so personal, but that's the way it was. And they had me preach. I was driving 200 miles round trip to preach for them. Across the alley. And they said, Bud, we really like your sermons. They were one of the few groups that said that. Could you come and be our pastor? And I said, no, I can't come and be your pastor. I can't do that. And they said, why? We really like you. And I said, well, you wouldn't after a while. Because within just a couple of months, I'd be outside in the front yard in the church, putting up this great big banner, stretched out across the driveway, stretched out across the front yard, saying brand new church starting, 3 months from now. You come, we want choir members, we need youth members, we need music directors, we need Sunday school teachers. You come and share, and we'll let you call it anything you want it to. We'll let you be part of this congregation, and you can elect your own pastor, and you can make this a tremendous church. And they looked at me and they said, but Bob, this is our church. And I said, yeah, for a little while longer it is. But I'm a student of church history. And you know what church history tells me? Churches that are in your situation, if they don't get serious about ministry, get sold to other people who turn the building into another ministry with a different name and a different group of people. And they go ahead. One of the first assignments I had in my seminary career was a very simple one. They asked me to chart all of the history of all the congregations in the Church of God for 100 years. Go back 100 years. Tell me how many new ones have been planted, how many went out of existence, what happened. And you know what I discovered by going back through all the journals and all the records? During periods of time, usually kind of in cycles, there would be a whole group of churches that would just disappear off the record. But as amazing as it sounds, in just a very short amount of time, there'd be a whole new group of churches show up on the record as new congregations. You know what was happening? They were taking the old buildings and selling them and using that to seed money into new congregations. And you go down through the countryside in Indiana and a lot of the places where I grew up, and you'll see old buildings that now are being used for machinery storage and that kind of stuff. And you realize they've gone through several different owners, several different hands, and several different groups have been there, and now they're not used as churches anymore. You can see the old one-room schoolhouses right alongside of them too, because they don't use them for what they were used for before either. And the old has been replaced with something more useful, or utilitarian, or more vibrant. The church down where I was talking about hadn't gotten the message yet. They didn't realize that they had to develop a hunger to reach people. They should have been out there helping me pound the post in the ground, what they should have done. They should have been out there saying, what do we got to do? We got to get serious about this thing. Just like Boaz was. There's a bunch of people out here going to go real hungry, real bad, if they don't get inside the church building and start hearing some of the good news. There's some of these people that are going to be really, really lonesome and really hurting. And there's a whole lot of broken families. I mean, I dealt with a couple just recently. And they're starting their married life without the resources of the church. And I'm going, how do you face second families, multiple marriages previously, all kinds of children with multiple different fathers and mothers, all put together into a combination, and you're going to try and do that without God's help? Crazy, man. It's crazy. It's going to be hard enough if you're not sitting in a Bible study with us. Because take care of people and help them to cope. And they're on their own. And that sorrow for having that hunger to reach people and provide for them something was a part of Boaz's heart. He had no reason, he had no obvious reason to go out of his way to take care of Ruth. She wasn't his problem. But he did. He made room for Ruth. Now, that's a scary thing for those of us in the church. I made a little diagram here, and it's not much. I'm not sure you can even see it, but this is the way we would like to. It's not a target. I'm sorry, this is not. This is the way church people think churches grow. All right? Do you understand? This is us, the faithful core, and all we really want is someone to come in and join us and keep expanding the circle and going this way. That's the way church people think about church growth. You already know I've set you up, because that's not the way churches grow, and that's not the way organizations grow. They grow this way. It's lumpy. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. It feels like we're taking a terrible risk. And it is. Here's what it is. I'm going to just use this is just the start of it. These two circles over here, the one green one is Naomi, and that's her husband. And right along with them, the pink circle is one of her sons, and the other one's down here. And then the red one is Ruth. And we connect with people much the same way as Naomi and her family grew and developed. Now, if I was to take this and say, okay, now, what kind of things does this, speak about? Well, Naomi and her son and her other son are all connected. You see how they overlap? That means they're a part of the same circle. They've got a lot of things that they share in common. They have the same heritage. They have the same traditions. They have the same habits. They use the same deodorant, so they all smell the same. I mean, that kind of thing. They all drink from the same side of the water glass. They don't, do weird things with it. And they all wash their hands before they come inside. They know how to take care of business in the normal way. Notice Ruth only just barely touches on this one, and she's totally disconnected from this one over here, from her father-in-law. The red one is only connected with what had been her husband and with her mother-in-law. That's the way human relationships develop. Now, if we were going to take this as a church, the risk that happens when we start reaching new people is the organization takes on a new character all of its own. Do you follow? As new people come in, we make room for the Ruths, or we stay stagnant. If we take the Ruths, we have to change a few things. We have to change some of our attitude. We have to change some of our thinking. We have to change our habits. One of the pastors over at the Fellowship Church told a story about how he had taken a group of it was a wonderful church, but they had a senior citizens club. It wasn't a church. It was a senior citizens sharing group, was what he originally started as a pastor at. And he had worked with them, and he'd done all kinds of things to try and teach them and train them, and they got the message, and they came alive. And they sacrificed it all to reach people. And one day, as one of the ladies was coming into the church, she was coming in for the early service. They had grown so much that the central core of people that had been there were still very active, but she had come for the early service. And as she came through the door, the pastor greeted her, and he hugged her, and he said, I would like to introduce you to two people who have come to attend our early morning service. And he introduced her, one of his faithful congregation, to a husband and wife who had just started recently attending the church. And he said, I want you two people, this couple, to realize who made it possible for you to be here today. This is one of the ladies who has sacrificed so that you would have a place of worship today. Now, what has she sacrificed? Well, for instance, she's coming in for the early service. She doesn't like the worship service on a Sunday morning. It's not her style of worship. It's not the way she wants to. She doesn't want to come to worship in that contemporary style. So she came to take care of your children. She's here to worship, but in the nursery or in the children's program back in the educational wing. You know why? She already has had her church service for the week. She comes in on Saturday night and worships on Saturday evening so that she can be free to serve you on Sunday morning. And, oh, by the way, when it comes to the later service, we tell her, get your car out of the parking lot. We need that parking for other people. Please go back home. And she can't come to church at her normal worship times because there are enough new people that she can't even attend because she'd be taking up space for somebody that would be new. She sacrificed for you to be here. Dad gave me this. He knew this sermon was coming. I love this. It's called My Seat. It's written by Zen Carney from the Banner Press from 1997. Things haven't changed much. A lady took my seat in church a while back. It's not that important, really. She's a very nice lady, kind, considerate, good friend, in fact. There are several other seats available. I can sit any place. People in my congregation are as friendly and caring as you'll find any place in the world. A person should be comfortable sitting any place. It's no big deal. My seat's in the 7th row back from the front of the church. I'm not sure she didn't intend to take my seat. She just wouldn't do that, nor would anyone else in this fine church. It doesn't really make that much difference. My seat's at the end of the pew on the north side by the windows. It's on the left as you come into the sanctuary, and I can rest my left arm on the end of the pew. It's a good seat. She probably didn't intend anything personal by taking my seat, and I'd never, ever hold a grudge. It's not a Christian thing to do. Actually, it was about 3 months ago when she took my seat. I really don't know why she took it. I've never done anything to her. I've never taken her seat. I suppose I'll have to come an hour early now to get my seat. Either that or sit on the south side. She really took it because it's one of the best seats in the house. That's why she took it. She had no business taking my seat. And I'm not going to church 2 hours early to guess what rightfully mine from the beginning. This is the way great social injustices begin. Abusive people taking other people's seats in church. That's just the way the seeds of revolution are sown. A person can only stand so much. Where's it going to end? If somebody doesn't stand up and be counted, nobody's seat will be safe. People will just sit in place they want to. The next thing they'll do is be parking in my parking place too. World order will be in shambles. And don't laugh, because I was in the middle of a fight in my church in Fort Wayne over people that parked in the wrong parking place, and they were told they had to move it. All right? Now we laugh about it. Laugh about it. But the point is, we need to stop and prayerfully consider. We need to stop and very prayerfully consider, what has God called us to be? Who are we? is our nature. Can you imagine for a moment what would have happened to the people of Israel if Boaz has said, it's the harvest time. I've got too much stuff to look after. Are you kidding? I've got fields all over the place. I've got harvesters that have to be one. I've got people that are... If I don't take care of this during this important time of the year, and I get distracted by some silliness that's going on in one of the fields, I'll not have the kind of harvest to be able to take care of people the rest of the year. Let her fend for herself. We would have lost Ruth. What a tragedy that would have been. The grandmother, great-grandmother of King David. We can't know what the next person that comes through that door is going to mean to the ministry of this church or to this world. But it could very well be someone as precious as Ruth. When God works his miracle and their life is transformed as he has done so many, many times before. We look at them the way they are now, just Moabites. She's nothing. They may be more of a problem than anything else. Moabites. She doesn't fit with us. It's a problem for churches everywhere. It's a problem for the churches that we were working with for the last month. It's the churches that we deal with all over the country because we want to worship with someone just like us. And they don't make them just like us anymore. They broke the mold, back in the 50s somewhere. They don't make them that way. So we have to take people that do come the way they are. And we have to find a way of loving them and making room for the next Ruth. It's going to be in our community. And that means that somebody may have to move off. Oh, I got to tell you a funny story. When my church in Pennsylvania was growing so well and we were beginning to have a lot of new people come in and that kind of stuff, it has to follow this. I have to tell you the other side of the story. We started getting people that were unfamiliar faces. And you know things are changing when your old faithful people say, there's just so many people I can't call by name anymore. You know how it is? It was changing. And so one day I got up and I said, you know what, people? I think it'd be an exciting experiment that would be a demonstration to everybody that comes through that door on a Sunday morning for the next month, 6 weeks, or whatever it was. To walk in and intentionally sit somewhere other than where you normally sit. Surrounded by people that you don't normally say hi to. In a whole different place. And what that'll tell people is, we are willing to go out of our way to make a place for you. You take my place. I'll sit someplace else. Now that church was 150 years old. They celebrated the 150th anniversary while I was there. Everybody had a seat. And those families have been sitting in those seats a long time. And please understand, we're not talking about seats. We're talking about an attitude toward people. An attitude toward people that hadn't been a part of the congregation before, who had no history with us. We didn't know who they were. We didn't really have a sense of how they were going to fit in. But you either want to make room for the next Ruth, or you just sit there with your arms crossed and say, I like it the way it is. We had more families come to us during that month. I mean, it was chaos. When you walked in that church, see, I take attendance by knowing where people sit. And so I can go home at lunchtime and I can sit there and take attendance at church. Because I know where everybody's at, and I can say, okay, they weren't in the right place. Okay. Oh, they had the family there, so they had to sit over in the backside of the room there. More room for them, and I could kind of sense who I needed to talk to the next week because they weren't in the right pattern. It was unbelievable. I mean, I sat for the opening part of the worship service back in the balcony a couple of Sundays, and somebody else was sitting on my seat up on the platform. I mean, we just were sitting every which way, and we had more fun with that experiment. And when families came out and said, we never saw anybody work so hard to make us feel warm and loved. Never, ever saw it. And they're still part of the church today. Because someone decided that they wanted to make room for Ruth and get her inside the circle.